The handcuffs were cold against Sarah Mitchell's wrists. She stood frozen in the center of Richard Harper's penthouse, surrounded by Italian marble floors and floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked all of Manhattan. 2 police officers flanked her on either side, their grip firm and unyielding. The chandelier above cast prismatic light across the scene, making everything look almost dreamlike, almost beautiful, if not for the nightmare unfolding beneath it. Victoria Harper held up the evidence like a trophy. The diamond necklace caught the light and scattered it into 1,000 fragments across the walls. $2 million dangling from perfectly manicured fingers. "I found it in her bag," Victoria announced, her voice carrying the practiced tone of someone who had rehearsed this moment. Catherine's necklace. The one she left for Madison. Sarah's mouth opened, but no sound came out. Her mind couldn't process what was happening. 3 hours ago. She had been reading bedtime stories to Madison. 3 hours ago. Everything had been fine. Now she was standing in handcuffs, accused of stealing from the family she had grown to love. "I didn't take it." The words finally came, weak and trembling. "I would never." "Richard, please. You have to believe me." Richard Harper stood by the fireplace, his tall frame rigid, his face unreadable. He was a man who commanded boardrooms and negotiated billion-dollar deals without flinching. But now he simply stared at the necklace in his sister's hand, saying nothing. His silence was louder than any accusation. "Richard." Sarah's voice cracked. "Look at me. You know me. You know I wouldn't do this." He didn't look at her. He didn't move. He didn't speak. Victoria stepped closer to the officers, her heels clicking against the marble like a countdown. "This necklace was my sister-in-law's most precious possession. She left it for her daughter, and this woman." She gestured at Sarah with disgust. "This woman we welcomed into our home tried to steal it." "That's not true." Sarah pulled against the officer's grip, desperation rising in her chest. "Someone put it there. I never touched that necklace. I never even knew where it was kept." But even as she said the words, she could see how it looked. The poor waitress, suddenly hired at an astronomical salary to care for a billionaire's daughter. The girl from nowhere, given access to one of Manhattan's wealthiest homes. Of course she would steal. Of course she would betray them. That was what people like her did. That was what everyone would believe. "Madison?" Sarah called out, her eyes scanning the room frantically. "Madison, where are you? Tell them I didn't do this." A sound from above made everyone look up. Madison Harper stood at the top of the curved staircase, small and still in her white nightgown. Her dark hair fell around her pale face. Her eyes, those eyes that had finally started to show warmth after months of cold resistance, now revealed nothing at all. Sarah felt her heart surge with hope. Madison knew. Madison had been with her all evening. Madison could tell them the truth. "Madison, sweetie." Sarah's voice softened despite her terror. "Please, tell your father. Tell the police. You know I would never steal from you. You know I would never hurt your family." The 9-year-old girl stood motionless, one hand resting on the banister. The grandfather clock in the hallway ticked through the silence. Everyone waited. Richard finally turned to look at his daughter. Victoria's smile faltered slightly. Madison opened her mouth, and then she closed it. Without a word, she turned and walked away, disappearing down the hallway toward her room. The soft padding of her footsteps faded into nothing. Sarah felt her knees buckle. No, 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 no. Madison, come back, please. The officers caught her, held her upright. One of them was already reciting something about rights, about remaining silent, about attorneys. The words blurred together into meaningless noise. All Sarah could see was the empty space at the top of the stairs where Madison had stood. "Get her out of here," Victoria said, waving her hand dismissively. "I want her prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. Grand larceny. Make sure that's on record." They started dragging Sarah toward the door. Her feet stumbled on the marble, unable to find purchase. The penthouse she had come to know intimately over the past 3 months now felt foreign, hostile, like a beautiful trap that had finally sprung shut. "Richard," she screamed over her shoulder. "Richard, please, I'm innocent. You have to believe me. I would never betray Madison. I would never betray you." But Richard Harper remained frozen by the fireplace, a statue of a man, unwilling or unable to meet her eyes. His silence condemned her more completely than any words could have. As the officers pushed Sarah through the doorway, she caught one last glimpse of Victoria Harper. The woman's face was composed, appropriately concerned. The perfect picture of a family member dealing with an unfortunate betrayal. But just for a moment. Barely a fraction of a second. Sarah saw something else. Victoria was smiling. The elevator doors closed, cutting off Sarah's view of the penthouse, of Victoria, of everything she had built over the past 3 months. She sagged against the wall, tears streaming down her face, the metal of the handcuffs biting into her skin. That was when it hit her. Not the arrest, not the accusation, not even Richard's devastating silence. It was Madison's face at the top of the stairs. For 3 months, Sarah had learned to read that child. She had decoded the anger that masked fear, the cruelty that hid grief, the silence that screamed for attention. She had watched Madison transform from a wounded animal lashing out at everyone into a little girl who was finally starting to trust again. Sarah had seen Madison scared. She had seen her furious. She had seen her sad and broken and desperately lonely. But she had never, not once in all those months, seen Madison smile like that. Not a warm smile, not a happy smile. A smile of satisfaction, a smile of completion, a smile that said something Sarah couldn't understand. The elevator descended through the floors of the building, carrying Sarah down toward the waiting police car, toward booking and fingerprints and a cell with bars. Above her, 47 floors up. Madison Harper walked into her mother's room and closed the door behind her. Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching from now. Let's continue with the story. The holding cell smelled of disinfectant and despair. Sarah sat on the metal bench, her back pressed against the cold concrete wall, her wrists still bearing red marks from where the handcuffs had been. The fluorescent light above flickered intermittently, casting harsh shadows across the small space. Somewhere down the hallway, a woman was sobbing. Somewhere else, a man was shouting obscenities at no one in particular. It was 11:47 at night. She had been here for 3 hours. A female officer appeared at the bars. "Mitchell, you get 1 phone call." Sarah stood on shaking legs and followed the officer to a wall-mounted phone. She picked up the receiver, her mind racing through the impossibly short list of people she could call. Her parents were dead, had been dead for 18 years. She had no siblings, no aunts or uncles, no family of any kind. Her college friends were acquaintances at best. People she studied with between her 3 part-time jobs. People who wouldn't answer a call from a jail at midnight. Sarah stared at the phone in her hand. The dial tone hummed steadily. Waiting. She was completely alone. "You gonna make a call or not?" the officer asked impatiently. Sarah hung up the phone. "There's no one." The officer's expression didn't change, but something flickered in her eyes. Pity, perhaps. Or maybe just the weariness of someone who had seen too many people in exactly this position. Back in the holding cell, Sarah pulled her knees up to her chest and tried to think. The charges were grand larceny, first degree, in New York. That meant the theft of property valued over $1 million. The necklace was worth $2 million. If convicted, she could face up to 25 years in prison. 25 years. The number echoed in her head like a death sentence. She was 24 years old. She would be 49 when she got out. Her entire youth, her entire life, erased. But that wasn't the most immediate threat. Sarah's mind raced to her university. Fall semester had just begun. She was in her final year, 12 credits away from a degree in social work. She had clawed her way through 4 years of night classes, weekend shifts, and endless exhaustion to get this close to graduation. Her scholarship required her to maintain a clean, legal record. An arrest, even without conviction, would trigger an immediate review. A felony charge would terminate her enrollment. She had worked 4 years for this. 4 years of sacrifice, of choosing textbooks over meals, of sleeping 4 hours a night so she could work enough hours to survive while still attending classes. 4 years of telling herself that the struggle was temporary, that education was her way out of poverty, her way to build a life that meant something. All of it could be destroyed by morning. Sarah pressed her palms against her eyes, fighting the tears that threatened to overwhelm her. She couldn't afford to break down. She needed to think. She needed to figure out how this had happened and how to prove her innocence. The necklace had been planted. That much was obvious. She had never touched it, never even seen it. Someone had deliberately placed it in her bag to frame her. Victoria. The name surfaced in Sarah's mind with sudden clarity. Victoria Harper, Richard's younger sister, with her designer clothes and her poisonous smile. Victoria, who had looked at Sarah with barely concealed hostility from the moment they met. Victoria, who had visited the penthouse more frequently in recent weeks, always watching, always asking questions. Victoria, who had smiled when Sarah was dragged away in handcuffs. But why? What could Victoria possibly gain from destroying Sarah? The question nagged at her. But Sarah's exhausted mind couldn't find the answer. All she knew was that someone had gone to elaborate lengths to remove her from Madison's life, someone who had access to the penthouse, access to Catherine Harper's jewelry, and access to Sarah's personal belongings. Someone who wanted her gone. The fluorescent light flickered again, and Sarah shivered in the cold cell. She thought about Madison, alone in that enormous penthouse with a father who worked 18-hour days and an aunt who smiled like a predator. She thought about the progress they had made over the past 3 months. The walls that had slowly crumbled, the trust that had painstakingly been built. Madison had walked away. Madison had refused to speak. The memory of it cut deeper than the handcuffs had. Sarah had believed they had formed a connection, a real bond forged through patience and persistence. She had believed Madison trusted her. Had she been wrong about everything Sarah shook her head, rejecting the thought. Something wasn't right. Madison's behavior at the top of the stairs had been strange, calculated in a way that didn't match the impulsive child Sarah knew. The smile had been deliberate. But deliberate for what purpose? A new officer appeared at the cell. Mitchell. Detective wants to see you. Sarah was escorted to an interrogation room, where a middle-aged man in a rumpled suit sat waiting. Detective Frank Morrison, according to his badge. He had tired eyes and a coffee stain on his tie. Sit down, Ms. Mitchell. Sarah sat. You understand the charges against you. I didn't steal anything. Morrison sighed, the sound of a man who had heard that exact sentence 10,000 times. The necklace was found in your bag. We have it on security camera, you entering Mrs. Harper's private room earlier that evening. Madison asked me to get something for her. A book. I was only in there for 30 seconds. 30 seconds is plenty of time to grab a necklace. I didn't take it. Someone planted it. Someone is trying to frame me. Morrison leaned back in his chair. Who would want to frame you, Ms. Mitchell? You're a waitress, no offense, but you're nobody. Who would go to this much trouble? The question stung because it was true. She was nobody, a girl from nowhere, with no family, no connections, no power. Why would anyone consider her enough of a threat to orchestrate something this elaborate? Unless it wasn't about her at all. Unless it was about Madison. I want a lawyer, Sarah said. That's your right. But I should tell you, Ms. Mitchell, the Harper family has significant influence in this city. Victoria Harper has already made calls. The DA is personally reviewing your case. Sarah's blood ran cold. What does that mean? It means this is being fast-tracked. Arraignment is tomorrow morning at 9. If you can't make bail, you'll be transferred to the Women's Detention Center by noon tomorrow morning. Less than 12 hours away. How much is bail? Morrison checked his file. Given the value of the stolen property and the flight risk assessment, the prosecutor is recommending $500,000. The number hit Sarah like a physical blow. $500,000. She didn't have $500. She didn't have $50. Everything she had was tied up in tuition payments and textbook costs and the tiny apartment she could barely afford. I can't pay that. Then you'll be transferred after arraignment. Morrison stood up. I'd suggest using your phone call to find a lawyer who works pro bono, Ms. Mitchell. You're going to need one. He left, and Sarah was escorted back to her cell. The metal bars clanged shut behind her, the sound ringing with finality. $500,000 bail. Arraignment in 12 hours. Transfer to detention if she couldn't pay. Her scholarship would be revoked the moment the university learned of her arrest. Her apartment would be lost when she couldn't pay rent. Everything she owned, everything she had worked for, would be gone within the week. And somewhere, 47 floors above the city streets, a 9-year-old girl was alone with people who didn't truly see her. Sarah slumped against the wall, her mind spinning with fear and exhaustion. She had no money, no lawyer, no allies, and no way to prove her innocence. The system was already moving against her, pushed by Harper money and Harper influence, and she was nothing but a small obstruction to be crushed and forgotten. The clock on the wall showed 12:15 in the morning. 8 hours and 45 minutes until arraignment. 8 hours and 45 minutes to figure out how to save herself. Sarah closed her eyes and tried to think. But all she could see was Madison's face at the top of the stairs. That strange and secret smile. As if the girl knew something no one else did. Down the hallway. A door opened and closed. Footsteps approached, different from the officer's heavy boots. These were sharp, precise, the click of expensive heels on concrete. Sarah opened her eyes. Victoria Harper stood on the other side of the bars, wrapped in a cashmere coat that probably cost more than Sarah's annual tuition. Her blonde hair was perfectly styled, her makeup immaculate despite the late hour. She looked like she had stepped out of a magazine shoot rather than a police station. "Hello, Sarah," Victoria said, her voice smooth as silk. "I think it's time we had a conversation about your future." Victoria's smile was a weapon, sharp and precise. She stood perfectly still on the other side of the bars, her posture radiating the kind of confidence that came from absolute certainty of victory. The fluorescent lights caught the diamonds in her ears, making them sparkle obscenely in the grim surroundings of the holding cell. "You look terrible," Victoria observed, tilting her head slightly. "Though, I suppose that's to be expected, given the circumstances." Sarah rose slowly from the metal bench. Every instinct told her to stay calm, to not give this woman the satisfaction of seeing her fear. But her hands were trembling, and there was nothing she could do to stop them. "What do you want?" "Straight to business. I appreciate that." Victoria reached into her designer handbag and produced a manila envelope. "I have a proposition for you, Sarah, one that could make all of this unpleasantness disappear." She slid the envelope through the gap in the bars. Sarah didn't move to pick it up. "What is that?" "A confession. Pre-written, very straightforward. You admit to stealing the necklace, you express remorse, and you agree to leave New York permanently. In exchange, I convince Richard to drop the charges. You walk out of here tonight, free and clear." Sarah stared at the envelope on the floor like it was a coiled snake. "You want me to confess to something I didn't do. I want you to be practical." Victoria's voice hardened slightly. "You have no money, no lawyer, and no one coming to save you. The Harper name carries weight in this city. Weight you cannot possibly comprehend. If this goes to trial, you will lose. The evidence is overwhelming, and the prosecutor is a personal friend of the family. The evidence is fabricated. You planted that necklace." Victoria's expression didn't change. "Prove it." The two words hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. Sarah couldn't prove it. She had no access to security footage, no resources to hire investigators, no way to demonstrate what had really happened. It would be her word against the Harper families, and she already knew how that equation would resolve. "Why are you doing this?" Sarah asked, her voice cracking despite her efforts to stay composed. "What did I ever do to you?" "You." Victoria laughed, a cold and musical sound. "You did nothing. You're irrelevant. Sarah, a minor inconvenience that needed to be removed." "Removed from what?" Victoria stepped closer to the bars, lowering her voice. "That child is worth $8 billion. $8 billion. Her mother's estate, her grandfather's trust fund, investments that have been compounding for decades. Whoever controls Madison controls all of it." Sarah felt her stomach turn. "This is about money. You're destroying my life over money. I'm securing my future. There's a difference. Victoria's eyes glittered with something that looked almost like hunger. Richard is a fool. He buries himself in work and ignores his daughter. He has no idea how to raise a child, and eventually the courts will recognize that. When they do, I'll be there, the concerned aunt, ready to step in and provide the stable home environment Madison needs. You don't care about Madison at all. Madison is a means to an end, a troubled, difficult, emotionally damaged means to an end. Victoria shrugged elegantly. She was actually helping my case quite nicely, driving away every caretaker Richard hired, proving how unstable the household was. And then you came along. The pieces clicked together in Sarah's mind with sickening clarity. Victoria had been waiting, watching, letting Madison's behavior deteriorate so she could eventually petition for guardianship. But Sarah had disrupted that plan. Sarah had connected with Madison, had started to help her heal, had threatened to stabilize a situation that Victoria needed to remain chaotic. You're a monster, Sarah whispered. I'm a realist. There's a difference. Victoria tapped the envelope with one perfectly manicured nail. Sign the confession. Sarah, take the deal. Go back to whatever sad little life you came from and forget any of this ever happened. It's the smart choice. And if I refuse, Victoria's smile widened. Then I'll bury you. I'll make sure you serve the maximum sentence, 25 years in a federal prison. I'll have your scholarship revoked by morning and your name dragged through every tabloid in the city. When you finally get out, you'll be middle-aged with a felony record and no prospects. Is that really what you want? Sarah looked at the envelope on the floor, then back at Victoria. Her mind raced through her options, searching for any path that didn't lead to destruction. If she signed, she would be free tonight. She could start over somewhere else, rebuild her life far from New York and the Harper family. It would mean abandoning Madison, abandoning any hope of justice. But at least she would have a future. If she refused, she faced a system designed to crush people like her. No money, no power, no connections. Just her word against the combined weight of Harper influence and fabricated evidence. It wasn't really a choice at all. It was a trap, carefully constructed to leave her only one viable exit. Sarah bent down and picked up the envelope. Victoria's smile turned triumphant. I knew you'd be sensible. Sarah opened the envelope and pulled out the confession. 3 pages, typed neatly, with spaces for her signature at the bottom. She read through it quickly, her eyes scanning the damning words that would end her life in New York forever. Then she thought about Madison. Madison, who had lost her mother and been abandoned by her father's grief. Madison, who had spent a year pushing everyone away because she was terrified of being hurt again. Madison, who had finally, hesitantly, started to trust Sarah with her pain. Madison, who would be left alone with this woman. Sarah looked up at Victoria. No. The smile froze on Victoria's face. Excuse me. No. Sarah tore the confession in half, then in quarters, then dropped the pieces on the floor. I'm not signing anything. I'm not confessing to a crime I didn't commit. And I'm not leaving Madison alone with you. Victoria's composure cracked, just for a moment. Anger flashed in her eyes, hot and dangerous. You stupid girl. You have no idea what you're doing. I'm doing the right thing. The right thing. Victoria laughed, but there was no humor in it now. The right thing is going to cost you everything. Your education, your freedom, your entire future. And for what? For a child who walked away from you tonight without a word, for a child who refused to defend you when you begged for her help. The words hit their mark, and Sarah flinched. But she held her ground. Madison is 9 years old. She's scared and confused and grieving. I don't know why she didn't speak up, but I know she's not my enemy. You are. Victoria stepped back from the bars, her expression settling into something cold and hard. Fine. Have it your way. But remember this moment. Sarah, remember that I offered you a way out, and you were too foolish to take it. She turned and began walking away, her heels clicking sharply against the concrete. Wait, Sarah called out. What did you tell Madison? The night you visited her room, what did you say to her? Victoria paused but didn't turn around. I told her the truth, that her mother died because of her. That Catherine pushed herself to attend Madison's birthday party against doctor's orders, and it killed her. She glanced back over her shoulder, smiling. Funny how the truth can be more devastating than any lie. She walked away, disappearing through the security door, leaving Sarah alone in the cold cell. Sarah sank back onto the metal bench, her brief surge of defiance draining away. She had refused the deal. She had done the right thing. But Victoria was correct about one thing: it was going to cost her everything. The clock on the wall showed 1:30 in the morning. 7 hours and 30 minutes until arraignment. Sarah tried to organize her thoughts, to formulate some kind of plan. She needed a lawyer, someone who would work her case without payment. She needed evidence, something that would prove the necklace had been planted. She needed time, and time was the one thing she didn't have. A different officer appeared at her cell. Mitchell, your lawyer's here. Sarah looked up, confused. I don't have a lawyer. Well, someone's here claiming to represent you. Interview room 2. She was escorted down the hallway to a small room with a metal table and 2 chairs. A man sat waiting, mid-30s, wearing a suit that looked expensive but rumpled, as if he'd dressed in a hurry. He had kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses and a briefcase open in front of him. Ms. Mitchell, please sit down. My name is David Chen. I'm a defense attorney. Sarah sat, wary. I didn't call anyone. I couldn't afford an attorney if I wanted one. I know. I'm here pro bono. Why? David hesitated, then reached into his briefcase and pulled out a photograph. He slid it across the table to Sarah. It showed a group of children standing in front of a brick building, smiling at the camera. Sarah recognized the building immediately. It was the Brooklyn orphanage where she had spent 12 years of her childhood. I grew up there too, David said quietly. Different years, but the same place. When I saw your arrest on the news tonight, saw your background in the report, I knew I had to help. Sarah stared at the photograph, at the faces of children she had once known, at the building that had been her entire world for so long. Tears pricked at her eyes. You saw me on the news. It's already running. Victoria Harper made sure of that. David's expression darkened. The headline is, Billionaire's trust betrayed waitress, arrested for stealing priceless heirloom. They're painting you as a gold digger who wormed her way into the family. Sarah's throat tightened. The news, her name, her face, broadcast across the city. Her professors would see it. Her landlord would see it. Everyone she had ever known would see it. "Can you help me?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I can try, but I need you to understand something first." David leaned forward, his expression serious. "I made some calls on the way here. The Harper family isn't just wealthy. They're connected. Victoria has been building relationships with judges and prosecutors for years. This case isn't going to be tried on evidence alone. It's going to be tried on influence. So, what does that mean for me? It means even if we can prove your innocence, we might not win." David pulled out a legal pad and began writing. "The arraignment is in a few hours. The DA is pushing for high bail specifically to keep you locked up. If you're transferred to detention, it could take weeks or months to get a trial date. By then, your scholarship will be gone, your apartment will be lost, and the public narrative will be set in stone." Sarah felt the walls closing in around her. Every path forward seemed blocked. Every option seemed to lead to the same devastating conclusion. "There has to be something," she said desperately. "Some way to prove what really happened." "There might be." David pulled out another document. "I requested the security footage from the Harper penthouse. Standard discovery procedure. But here's the interesting thing. According to the building's security company, large portions of the footage from yesterday have been corrupted. Specifically, the footage from the hours when the necklace was allegedly taken." "Corrupted? You mean deleted?" "Officially, it's a system malfunction. Unofficially." David shook his head. "Someone with access to the building's security system made sure there's no video evidence of how that necklace really ended up in your bag." Sarah thought about Victoria, about her connections, about the elaborate trap that had been constructed around her. Of course, the footage was gone. Victoria had thought of everything. But then another thought struck her. Wait. The building's security cameras aren't the only cameras in the penthouse. Sarah sat up straighter, a spark of hope igniting in her chest. Richard Harper is paranoid about security. Madison told me once that there are hidden cameras throughout the apartment, ones that run on a separate system. David's eyes widened. Hidden cameras where? I don't know exactly. Madison mentioned them in passing. Said her father installed them after some business rival threatened the family. If those cameras exist, and if they're on a different system, then there might be footage Victoria didn't know to delete. David was already packing his briefcase. I need to file a motion for expanded discovery immediately. If we can get access to those secondary cameras. You can't. Sarah's hope died as quickly as it had sparked. Richard would have to authorize that. And right now, he thinks I'm guilty. He won't help me. David paused, considering. What about Madison? You said she knew about the cameras. Is there any chance she could... She's 9 years old. And after tonight, I don't even know if she still trusts me. They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of impossibility pressing down on both of them. Finally, David spoke. The arraignment is in 6 hours. I'll do everything I can to get bail reduced. But I need you to prepare yourself for the possibility that you'll be transferred to detention today. If that happens, We'll have limited time to communicate and even more limited resources to investigate. I understand. David stood to leave, then paused at the door. Ms. Mitchell, can I ask you something? Why didn't you take Victoria's deal? A confession would have gotten you out of here tonight. Sarah thought about the question, about the torn pieces of paper still lying on the floor of her cell. Because there's a little girl up there who needs someone to fight for her, even if she doesn't know it yet. David nodded slowly. Get some rest if you can. Tomorrow is going to be a long day. He left, and Sarah was escorted back to her cell. She lay down on the metal bench, staring at the ceiling, her mind churning through everything she had learned. Victoria had planned this for months, maybe years. She had the connections, the resources, the ruthlessness to see it through. The only evidence that could exonerate Sarah was locked behind doors she couldn't open, controlled by people who either hated her or believed she was a criminal. And somewhere in that penthouse, Madison was alone with the truth. Sarah closed her eyes, exhaustion finally overtaking her. Her last thought before sleep claimed her was of Madison's face at the top of the stairs, that strange and secret smile. She still didn't understand what it meant. But as she drifted into unconsciousness, a new fear crept into her mind. A fear worse than prison, worse than losing everything she had worked for. What if Victoria had gotten to Madison too? What if the damage was already done? And the little girl Sarah had grown to love was already lost to her forever. The courtroom was smaller than Sarah had imagined. She stood at the defense table in the same clothes she had been wearing when she was arrested, wrinkled and stained with coffee from a lifetime ago. Her hair was tangled, her face pale from a sleepless night, her wrists still bearing faint red marks from the handcuffs. She looked exactly like what the prosecution wanted her to look like, guilty. David Chen stood beside her, freshly shaved and professionally composed, a stark contrast to her disheveled appearance. He had arrived at 6 a.m. with coffee and a change of strategy, though Sarah could see the concern he was trying to hide behind his calm demeanor. The gallery behind them was surprisingly full. Reporters occupied the back rows, their notebooks open, their eyes hungry for scandal. A few photographers had been allowed inside, their cameras clicking softly whenever something noteworthy happened. The Harper name drew attention, and Sarah's arrest had become the story of the morning. Victoria Harper sat in the front row, dressed in elegant black as if attending a funeral. Her expression was somber, appropriately grieved, the picture of a family member wounded by betrayal. She had positioned herself perfectly within view of the cameras. Richard Harper was notably absent. The judge, a stern-faced woman in her 60s named Patricia Holloway, reviewed the documents in front of her with methodical precision. Sarah watched her face for any sign of sympathy or skepticism, but the judge's expression revealed nothing. The People versus Sarah Mitchell, the clerk announced. Charges include grand larceny in the first degree, criminal possession of stolen property in the first degree, and burglary in the second degree. Sarah felt her knees weaken. Burglary. They had added burglary to the charges. David had warned her this might happen, that the prosecution would pile on charges to pressure her into a plea deal. But hearing them read aloud made everything terrifyingly real. The prosecutor, a sharp-featured man named Harrison Wells, rose to address the court. Your Honor, the People request bail be set at $500,000. The defendant has no significant ties to the community, no family in the area, and limited financial resources. She presents a significant flight risk. Your Honor, David interjected, my client is a full-time student at Columbia University with a spotless record. She has lived in New York for 4 years and has never missed a day of work or class. She has no passport and no means to flee. The bail amount requested is punitive and designed solely to ensure pretrial detention. Judge Holloway looked at Sarah over her reading glasses. Ms. Mitchell, how do you plead not guilty, Your Honor? Sarah's voice came out stronger than she expected. The judge nodded and reviewed her notes. Given the value of the allegedly stolen property and the circumstances of the case, I'm setting bail at $250,000, cash or bond. David leaned over to whisper to Sarah. It's still too high, but it's half what they wanted. We might be able to work with this. $250,000. Sarah almost laughed at the absurdity. It might as well have been $250 million. The gavel came down, and Sarah was led toward the side door that would take her back to the holding area. In a few hours, she would be transferred to the Women's Detention Center, where she would wait for a trial that might not happen for months. She glanced back at the gallery one last time. Victoria was already surrounded by reporters, speaking in hushed tones, playing the role of the concerned family member. Her performance was flawless. Then Sarah saw something that made her heart stop. At the very back of the courtroom, almost hidden behind a column, stood a small figure in a private school uniform. Dark hair, pale face, eyes fixed directly on Sarah. Madison. Their gazes met for just a moment. Madison's expression was unreadable. That same strange blankness she had worn the night before. But just before Sarah was pulled through the doorway, she saw Madison's hand move slightly. The girl was holding something, a phone, maybe, or a small device. She raised it briefly, pointing it in Victoria's direction before slipping it back into her blazer pocket. Then Madison turned and disappeared into the crowd. Sarah's mind raced as she was escorted back to holding. Madison had been in the courtroom. Madison had been watching. And Madison had been doing something with that device, something deliberate and purposeful. What was the girl planning 2 hours later? Sarah sat in the holding area, waiting for the transfer that would take her to detention. David had promised to keep working on her case, to file motions and pursue every legal avenue. But they both knew the odds were against them. Without evidence, without witnesses, without some miracle, Sarah would likely spend months behind bars before she even got a chance to defend herself in court. The door opened, and a guard appeared. "Mitchell, you made bail?" Sarah looked up, certain she had misheard. "What? Bail's been posted. You're free to go. Processing will take about an hour." "That's impossible. I don't have that kind of money. No one I know has that kind of money." The guard shrugged. "Someone does. Get your things together." Sarah moved through the release process in a daze. Paperwork was signed, belongings were returned, and suddenly she was standing in the lobby of the courthouse, blinking in the afternoon sunlight that streamed through the windows. David was waiting for her. His expression a mixture of relief and confusion. "What happened?" Sarah asked. "Who paid my bail?" "I don't know. The payment was made anonymously through a bail bond company. Whoever did it used cash and refused to leave any identifying information." "That doesn't make sense. Who would pay $250,000 to get me out of jail? I was hoping you could tell me. Sarah shook her head. She had no wealthy friends, no secret benefactors, no one in her life capable of producing that kind of money on short notice. The only people she knew with those resources were the Harpers, and the idea of any of them helping her was absurd. Unless... Her mind went back to the courtroom, to Madison standing in the shadows, to the device in the girl's hand. But that was impossible. Madison was 9 years old. She couldn't access that kind of money, couldn't navigate the legal system well enough to post bail anonymously. Could she? What do we do now? Sarah asked. Now we investigate. You're out, which means we have time to build a real defense. David handed her a folder. I've been doing some research on Victoria Harper. There are some interesting patterns in her financial records, some irregularities that might be worth exploring. Sarah opened the folder and scanned the documents inside. Bank statements, property records, corporate filings. Most of it was beyond her understanding, but certain phrases jumped out at her. Trust fund disbursements, guardianship petitions, power of attorney filings. She's been planning this for a long time, Sarah murmured. At least 2 years, based on what I've found. She's been positioning herself as the responsible family member, the one who should take over if Richard proves unfit. And getting rid of me was part of that plan. You were stabilizing the situation. Madison was finally starting to improve, which meant Richard's position as a parent was strengthening. Victoria needed to create chaos, and framing you accomplished multiple goals at once. Sarah closed the folder. How do we prove it? That's the hard part. Victoria's been careful. Everything is circumstantial. David hesitated. There is one thing that might help, but it's a long shot. Tell me. The hidden camera system you mentioned, if those cameras exist and if they captured Victoria planning the necklace, it would be irrefutable proof. But Richard Harper is the only one who can authorize access to that footage. And Richard thinks I'm guilty. Maybe. Or maybe he's starting to have doubts. David pulled out his phone. I received a message this morning from Harper's personal assistant. Richard wants to meet with you. Tonight. At the penthouse. Sarah stared at him. He wants to meet with me after everything that happened. Apparently so. The message was brief. Just an address and a time. 8 o'clock. Sarah's mind spun through the implications. Richard Harper, who had stood silent while she was arrested. Richard Harper, who had refused to meet her eyes as she begged for his help. Now he wanted to talk. It could be a trap. Another scheme orchestrated by Victoria to finish what she had started. Or it could be something else entirely. I'll go, Sarah said. Are you sure, given everything that's happened? I need to know why, and I need to see Madison. Sarah took a deep breath. Besides, if there's any chance Richard is willing to help, any chance at all, I have to take it. David nodded slowly. I'll be nearby. If anything goes wrong, call me immediately. Sarah spent the afternoon at David's office, reviewing documents and preparing for the evening ahead. They went over the evidence against her. The holes in the prosecution's case, the questions that remained unanswered. But through it all, Sarah's mind kept drifting back to Madison, the girl in the courtroom, the device in her hand, the anonymous bail payment. Something was happening that Sarah didn't understand, pieces moving on a board she couldn't see. At 7:30, she took a cab to the Harper building. The doorman recognized her and, after a brief phone call upstairs, allowed her access to the private elevator. Sarah stood alone as the car climbed 47 floors, watching the numbers tick higher with each passing second. The elevator opened directly into the penthouse foyer. Sarah stepped out, her heart pounding. The apartment was quiet. The kind of silence that felt heavy and oppressive. Late evening light filtered through the massive windows, casting long shadows across the marble floors. Everything looked exactly as it had the night before. Yet everything felt different. Richard Harper stood by the fireplace, his back to her. He was still wearing a business suit, though his tie had been loosened and his jacket discarded on a nearby chair. He looked older somehow, more tired, as if the past 24 hours had aged him significantly. "Thank you for coming," he said without turning around. "Your message didn't leave much room for declining." Richard finally turned to face her. His eyes were red-rimmed, his jaw tight with tension. "I need to ask you something. And I need you to answer honestly. I've been honest from the beginning. Did you take my wife's necklace?" Sarah met his gaze directly. "No. I have never stolen anything in my life. Someone planted that necklace in my bag to frame me." Richard studied her for a long moment, searching her face for signs of deception. Sarah stood her ground, letting him look, letting him see whatever he needed to see. Finally, he nodded. "I believe you." The words hit Sarah like a physical force. She had to grip the back of a nearby chair to steady herself. "You believe me. I've spent the last 24 hours reviewing everything. The security footage, the timeline, the behavior of everyone involved." Richard walked to his desk and picked up a tablet. "This morning, I found something on my private server. Something I wasn't supposed to find." He handed her the tablet. On the screen was a frozen video image, grainy but clear enough to recognize. It showed a woman entering Catherine Harper's private room, moving directly to the jewelry box, removing the necklace. The woman was Victoria. Sarah's hands trembled as she held the tablet. "Where did this come from?" "The secondary camera system. I installed it years ago, after a competitor threatened my family. Only I knew the access codes, or so I thought." Richard's voice hardened. "The footage was uploaded to my server anonymously this morning. No identifying information, no explanation, just the video." "Madison," Sarah whispered. "What?" "Madison knew about the cameras. She mentioned them to me once." Sarah looked up at Richard. "I saw her at the courthouse today. She was recording something on her phone." Richard's expression shifted, surprise mixing with something that looked almost like pain. "Madison did this?" "I think so. I think she's been planning something, though I don't understand what or how." Before Richard could respond, a sound came from the hallway. Footsteps, small and deliberate. Madison emerged from the shadows, still wearing her school uniform. Her face was composed, but her eyes burned with an intensity that seemed far too old for a 9-year-old. "I did it," she said simply. "I recorded Aunt Victoria. I paid Sarah's bail with the emergency credit card Dad gave me. And I uploaded the video to your server this morning." Richard stared at his daughter as if seeing her for the first time. "Madison, how did you—" "I've been watching Aunt Victoria for 6 months, ever since I heard her on the phone with her lawyer, talking about guardianship and money and getting rid of anyone who got in her way. Madison's voice was steady, almost clinical. She thought I was too stupid to understand. She was wrong. Sarah sank into a chair, overwhelmed. A 9-year-old had been conducting her own investigation, gathering evidence, planning a counterattack, all while everyone around her assumed she was nothing more than a troubled child acting out her grief. "Why didn't you tell someone?" Sarah asked. "Why didn't you tell your father?" Madison's composure cracked slightly. Just for a moment. Because he wasn't listening. He hasn't listened to anything since Mom died. The words hung in the air, heavy with accumulated pain. Richard flinched as if he had been struck. "Madison," he started, but she cut him off. "I couldn't tell anyone because no one believed anything I said. 8 nannies. And every single one of them told you I was impossible, that I was damaged, that I needed professional help. Every time I tried to warn someone about Aunt Victoria, they thought I was making it up for attention." She looked at Sarah, and some of the hardness in her eyes softened. "But you were different. You actually saw me. You didn't try to fix me or medicate me or send me away. You just stayed." Madison's voice wavered. "So, when Aunt Victoria started planning to get rid of you, I knew I had to stop her. I just needed proof." Sarah crossed the room and knelt in front of Madison. "The night I was arrested, when you walked away without saying anything, I thought, I know what you thought." Madison's eyes glistened with unshed tears. "But I couldn't defend you. Not then. Victoria was watching. If she knew I was working against her, she would have destroyed the evidence before anyone could find it. I had to let her think she had won. You let me think you had abandoned me. I'm sorry." The words came out small and broken. It was the only way. Sarah pulled Madison into a hug, feeling the girl's small body tremble against her. For a moment, everything else fell away. The arrest, the charges, the nightmare of the past 24 hours. All that mattered was that Madison was safe, and Madison had believed in her, even when it seemed like everyone else had turned away. Richard watched the scene with an expression of dawning comprehension. "Victoria, my own sister. She's been planning this for years. Dad." Madison pulled back from Sarah's embrace. "She wants my trust fund. She wants everything Mom left for me. And she was willing to hurt anyone who got in her way. Where is she now? Still at her hotel. She thinks she won. She thinks Sarah is in jail and everything is going according to plan." Richard's jaw tightened. He picked up his phone and dialed a number. "This is Richard Harper. I need to speak with the district attorney immediately." "Yes, I'll hold." While Richard made his calls, Sarah sat with Madison on the couch. The girl was exhausted. Sarah could see it in the shadows under her eyes and the slight tremor in her hands. Whatever brave face she had been wearing was starting to slip. "How did you access the cameras?" Sarah asked quietly. "Mom showed me. Before she died. She said if anything ever happened, if I ever felt unsafe, I should check the cameras." Madison stared at her hands. "I don't think she knew about Aunt Victoria, not specifically. But she knew something wasn't right. Your mother was very smart. She was the smartest person I ever knew." Madison looked up at Sarah. "You remind me of her sometimes. Not the way you look, but the way you don't give up." Sarah felt tears prick at her eyes. I don't know what to say to that. You don't have to say anything. They sat in comfortable silence as the evening light faded and the city outside began to sparkle with artificial stars. Richard's voice rose and fell in the background as he coordinated with lawyers and law enforcement, setting into motion the machinery that would bring Victoria to justice. For the first time in 24 hours, Sarah allowed herself to feel hope. The evidence was clear. Victoria would be arrested. The charges against Sarah would be dropped. Madison would be safe. And maybe, finally, this family could begin to heal. But even as relief washed over her, something nagged at the back of Sarah's mind. A detail that didn't quite fit, a loose thread she couldn't identify. It was Madison's phone. In the courtroom, Sarah had seen the girl recording something, pointing the device toward Victoria. But Victoria had just been talking to reporters, performing for the cameras, saying nothing incriminating. What had Madison been capturing? And more importantly, why had Madison been at the courthouse at all? The arraignment hadn't been announced publicly. The timing had been arranged specifically to minimize media exposure. For Madison to have known where and when to appear, she would have needed inside information. Information that a 9-year-old shouldn't have been able to access. Sarah looked at Madison, at the exhausted girl curled up beside her, and felt a chill run down her spine. Who had really orchestrated all of this? Who had been pulling the strings from the very beginning? And what else didn't she know? The police arrived at 11 that night. Sarah watched from the penthouse windows as 3 unmarked cars pulled up to the Harper building. Their lights off, their movements coordinated with the precision of a planned operation. Richard had spent the past 3 hours on the phone with the district attorney, with his personal lawyers, with contacts in the police department. The machinery of justice was finally turning in the right direction. Victoria Harper would be arrested within the hour. Madison had fallen asleep on the couch, her small body curled beneath a cashmere throw blanket, her face peaceful for the first time since Sarah had known her. The tension that usually tightened her features had melted away, replaced by the vulnerability of a child who had finally allowed herself to rest. Richard stood by the elevator, waiting to escort the detectives up. His posture was rigid, his expression carved from stone. Whatever he was feeling about his sister's betrayal, he had locked it away behind the impenetrable wall of a man accustomed to compartmentalizing his emotions. Sarah should have felt relieved. The nightmare was ending. The truth had been exposed. In a matter of hours, the charges against her would be dropped, her name would be cleared, and she could begin rebuilding the life that had been torn apart. But the nagging feeling wouldn't leave her alone. Something was wrong. Something she couldn't quite identify. Like a word on the tip of her tongue or a melody she couldn't quite place. The pieces of the puzzle fit together too perfectly, too neatly, as if they had been arranged by a careful hand. The elevator doors opened, and 2 detectives stepped into the penthouse. Sarah recognized one of them from the night before. A younger officer who'd been present during her arrest. The other was older, gray-haired, with the weary expression of someone who had seen too much. "Mr. Harper," the older detective said, extending his hand. "Detective Morrison, we spoke on the phone. Thank you for coming so quickly." Richard shook his hand. "I have all the evidence prepared. The video footage, the financial records, everything my lawyers have compiled. We'll need to review it all. But first, There's been a development you should know about. Sarah felt her stomach tighten. The detective's tone carried an undercurrent of something she didn't like. What kind of development? Richard asked. Morrison glanced at Sarah, then back at Richard. Victoria Harper turned herself in about an hour ago. She's at the station now, giving a full statement. She turned herself in, voluntarily, walked into the precinct with her lawyer and asked to make a confession. Sarah stepped forward, her unease growing. That doesn't make sense. Why would she confess? That's what we're trying to figure out. Morrison pulled out a tablet and handed it to Richard. She's making some interesting claims that involve both of you. Richard took the tablet and pressed play on the video that was already loaded. Sarah moved closer so she could see the screen. Victoria sat in an interrogation room, her hair slightly disheveled, her makeup smudged in a way that suggested she had been crying. Gone was the predatory confidence Sarah had seen in the holding cell. In its place was something that looked almost like remorse. "I want to tell the truth," Victoria said on the recording. "All of it. I've been carrying this weight for too long." The interviewing detective's voice came from off-screen. "Go ahead, Miss Harper." Victoria took a shaky breath. "I did plant the necklace. I did frame Sarah Mitchell, but I didn't do it alone." Sarah felt the blood drain from her face. "My brother, Richard, he's been planning this for months. He wanted Sarah gone because she was getting too close to Madison, too close to the truth about what really happened to Catherine." "What truth is that?" Victoria looked directly at the camera, her eyes glistening with tears. "Catherine didn't die of cancer. I mean, she had cancer. But that's not what killed her. Richard was slowly poisoning her, accelerating her decline. He wanted access to her trust fund, the one that was supposed to go to Madison." Richard slammed his hand against the wall. "That's insane. That's absolutely insane." Morrison held up a hand. "Let her finish." On the screen, Victoria continued. "I found out about it 6 months ago. Richard threatened me, said if I told anyone, he would destroy me. So I went along with his plan to frame Sarah. But I can't stay silent anymore. Not when an innocent woman is being sent to prison for something she didn't do." The video ended. Silence filled the penthouse. Sarah's mind reeled, trying to process what she had just heard. Victoria was claiming that Richard had murdered his wife. Victoria was claiming that the frame job had been Richard's idea. Victoria was positioning herself as a reluctant accomplice who had finally found her conscience. It was a lie. It had to be a lie. But it was also brilliant. A perfectly constructed counter-narrative that transformed Victoria from villain to victim. "This is insane," Richard repeated, his voice rising. "I loved my wife. I would never, ever hurt her. Victoria is lying to save herself. Mr. Harper, we're going to need you to come down to the station and answer some questions." "Am I being arrested?" "Not at this time, but given the seriousness of the allegations. This is exactly what she wants." Richard's composure finally cracked. "Don't you see she's turning the tables? She's making herself look like the victim so she can continue her plan to take Madison away from me." Morrison's expression remained neutral. "We need to investigate all claims. Mr. Harper, that's our job." Sarah watched the exchange with growing horror. Victoria hadn't given up. She had simply changed tactics. Instead of framing Sarah alone, she was now framing both Sarah and Richard, painting herself as the moral center of a sordid family drama. And it might actually work. "What about the video?" Sarah interjected. "The footage from the hidden cameras that shows Victoria planting the necklace." Morrison turned to her. "What video?" "The one Madison uploaded to Richard's server. It clearly shows Victoria entering Catherine's room and taking the necklace." Morrison looked at Richard. "Do you have this footage?" Richard grabbed his tablet and navigated to his private server. His face went pale. "It's gone." "What do you mean, gone?" "The files. They were here this morning. I watched them myself." Richard's hands shook as he scrolled through empty folders. "Everything's been deleted." Sarah felt the ground shifting beneath her feet. The evidence. The one piece of irrefutable proof that could have ended this nightmare. Gone. "That's convenient," Morrison said, his tone carefully neutral, but his skepticism clear. "Someone hacked into my system. Victoria must have. Miss Harper has been in custody for the past hour. She couldn't have deleted anything." The implication hung in the air, unspoken but understood. If Victoria hadn't deleted the files, then who had Sarah looked at the couch where Madison had been sleeping? The blanket was there, crumpled and empty. Madison was gone. "Where's Madison?" Sarah asked, her voice sharp with sudden fear. Richard spun around, his eyes scanning the room. "She was just here. She was sleeping right there." "Mr. Harper? Is there somewhere the child might have gone?" But Sarah was already moving, her instincts screaming that something was terribly wrong. She ran down the hallway toward Madison's room, her footsteps echoing off the marble floors. The door was closed. Sarah pushed it open. Madison sat at her desk, her back to the door, illuminated by the glow of a computer screen. She didn't turn around when Sarah entered. "Madison, what are you doing?" "Finishing what I started." Sarah stepped closer, and what she saw on the screen made her blood run cold. It was a video editing program. And on the timeline were dozens of clips, carefully arranged, being exported to a file labeled Evidence. "Madison, what is this?" The girl finally turned around, and Sarah saw something in her eyes that she had never seen before. Not fear, not sadness, not even anger. Something calculating. Something cold. "You really don't understand, do you?" Madison's voice was different now, stripped of the vulnerability she had displayed earlier. "You never understood." "Understood what?" Madison stood up slowly. "Everyone thinks I'm just a broken little girl acting out because she misses her mommy. Even you, Sarah. Even you saw what you wanted to see." Sarah's throat tightened. "Madison, you're scaring me." "Good. You should be scared." Madison walked to her window, looking out at the city lights. "Do you know what it's like to watch your mother die, to sit by her bed every day, watching her waste away, while your father works 18 hours and your aunt counts down the days until she can take everything? I can't imagine how painful that must have been." "No, you can't. Because you're like everyone else. You think grief makes people weak. But grief made me strong." Madison turned back to Sarah. "It made me see clearly for the first time in my life. See that no one was going to protect me. That I had to protect myself." Madison's lips curled into something that wasn't quite a smile. So I made a plan. Sarah felt sick. What kind of plan? Victoria wanted my money. Dad wanted his freedom. Neither of them wanted me. Madison shrugged. So I decided to get rid of them both. The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. Get rid of them, Madison. What are you saying? I'm saying that I've been setting this up for 6 months. I'm saying that I recorded Victoria talking about her plans. Yes. But I also recorded Dad saying things I took out of context. I'm saying that I have footage of both of them that can be edited to make them look guilty of almost anything. The video of Victoria planting the necklace? Real. But also the only copy. I deleted it from Dad's server 10 minutes ago. Madison tilted her head. Did you really think it was a coincidence that I knew exactly where Aunt Victoria would be? Exactly when to record her? Exactly how to post bail anonymously? I've been playing this game longer than any of them realize. Sarah's legs felt weak. She reached for the wall to steady herself. Why would you do this? Because I'm tired of being a pawn. Madison's voice hardened. Tired of being the thing everyone fights over. Tired of being the poor little orphan girl everyone wants to control. So you framed your own father. I gave the police evidence that could be interpreted multiple ways. Victoria's confession does the rest. They'll investigate each other, tear each other apart, and by the time it's over, neither of them will have any credibility left. Madison's eyes glittered. And then I'll be placed with a guardian of the court's choosing. Someone who has no claim on my trust fund. Someone who just has to take care of me until I'm 18. Sarah stared at the child in front of her, seeing her truly for the first time. Not a broken little girl. Not a grieving daughter. A strategist. A manipulator. A survivor who had learned to use everyone around her as pieces in a game only she knew she was playing. What about me? Sarah whispered. Was I part of your plan too? Madison's expression flickered just for a moment. You were supposed to be different. What does that mean? It means I actually liked you. It means when you didn't run away, when you didn't give up on me. I thought maybe. Madison stopped, her jaw tightening. But then I realized it didn't matter. You would leave eventually. Everyone leaves. So I decided to use you instead. Use me how? You were the perfect scapegoat. The poor waitress who infiltrated a wealthy family. When Victoria framed you, it gave me the opportunity I needed to expose her. And when I cleared your name, you would be grateful. Loyal, willing to testify to whatever I needed you to say. Sarah felt tears streaming down her face. I believed in you. I fought for you. I know. That's what made you useful. The door burst open behind them. Richard and the detectives rushed in, their faces tense with concern. Madison. Richard reached for his daughter. What's going on? Are you all right? Madison's expression transformed instantly. The cold calculation vanished, replaced by wide-eyed innocence. She ran to her father and wrapped her arms around him. Daddy, I'm scared. Sarah was saying terrible things. She was saying she's going to make sure you go to prison. Sarah's mouth fell open. That's not true, Richard. She's lying. She just told me. Told you what? Morrison interrupted. What exactly did the child tell you? Sarah looked at their faces, at the suspicion already forming in their eyes. A hysterical woman, freshly released from jail. alone in a room with a 9-year-old girl, now making wild accusations. She planned all of this, Sarah said desperately. The frame job, the evidence, everything. She's been manipulating everyone from the beginning. She's lying. Madison sobbed into her father's chest. I don't know why she's saying these things. I thought she was my friend. Richard's arms tightened around his daughter, his eyes hardening as he looked at Sarah. I think you should leave. Richard, please, you have to listen to me. I said leave. His voice was ice. Detective, please escort Ms. Mitchell out of my home. Mr. Harper, we still need to sort out now. Morrison took Sarah by the arm, not roughly, but firmly. Come on, Ms. Mitchell, let's go. Sarah looked back at Madison as she was led away. The girl's face was still buried against her father's chest, the picture of traumatized innocence. But just for a second, just as Sarah was pulled through the doorway, Madison looked up and smiled. That same smile from the night of the arrest. That same cold, knowing, triumphant smile. Sarah was escorted down 47 floors and deposited on the sidewalk outside the Harper building. The night air was cold, biting through her thin clothes, but she barely felt it. Everything she thought she knew was a lie. The vulnerable child she had bonded with, the progress she thought they had made, the trust she thought they had built. All of it was manufactured. All of it was a performance designed to manipulate her, use her, discard her. Her phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. Thank you for playing your part. Your charges will be dropped tomorrow. Consider it payment for services rendered. Don't contact this family again. Sarah sank to her knees on the cold concrete, her body shaking with sobs she couldn't control. She had come to this family to help a broken child. Instead, she had been a puppet in a game she never knew she was playing. And now she was alone again. Just as she had always been alone, with nothing but the knowledge that the one person she had truly believed in had never believed in her at all. The city rose around her, indifferent and vast. And Sarah Mitchell had never felt smaller in her entire life. 3 days passed like a funeral procession. Sarah lay on the mattress of her tiny Brooklyn apartment, staring at the water stain on the ceiling that had been there since she moved in 4 years ago. The stain looked like a face. She had decided long ago. A sad face with hollow eyes and a downturned mouth. For 4 years, she had looked at that face every morning and promised herself that things would get better. Now the face just looked like it was mocking her. The charges had been dropped, just as Madison had promised. The district attorney's office called David Chen on the second morning with news that the case was being dismissed due to insufficient evidence and conflicting witness statements. Sarah was officially free. Her record expunged, her name cleared in the eyes of the law. None of it mattered. Her phone had buzzed constantly for the first 2 days. Reporters wanting statements, bloggers wanting interviews, former classmates wanting gossip disguised as concern. Sarah had turned the phone off and shoved it in a drawer. Unable to face the avalanche of attention that came with being the center of a tabloid scandal. The story had taken on a life of its own. Harper family meltdown, the headline screamed. Billionaire and sister trade accusations in custody battle. Mystery waitress caught in web of wealth and deception. Sarah's face was everywhere. Taken from her social media accounts, plastered across websites and newspapers alongside photos of Richard and Victoria and the penthouse she had briefly called home. The coverage painted her as a victim. Mostly, the poor working-class girl who had stumbled into a nest of vipers. But there were other narratives, too. Darker ones that questioned her motives, her morals, her convenient presence at the center of the family's destruction. The internet had already decided she was either a saint or a gold digger, with nothing in between. David had called multiple times, leaving messages about potential civil suits, about opportunities to tell her side of the story, about the importance of controlling the narrative. Sarah hadn't returned any of his calls. What was there to say that a 9-year-old girl had orchestrated the entire thing? That the troubled child everyone pitied was actually a calculating mastermind who had manipulated every adult in her life? No one would believe it. Sarah barely believed it herself. On the third morning, she finally dragged herself out of bed. Her apartment was small, just a studio with a kitchenette and a bathroom barely big enough to turn around in. She had decorated it carefully over the years. Thrift store finds and handmade touches that made the cramped space feel like home. A bookshelf she had built from salvaged wood. Curtains she had sewn from fabric remnants. Photos of her parents, the only two she had, framed in dollar store frames on the windowsill. Now it all just looked sad. The desperate attempts of a poor girl trying to pretend she had a life worth living. Sarah made coffee with the last of her grounds and sat at the tiny table by the window. Outside, Brooklyn was waking up. People walking dogs, catching buses, living their ordinary lives. They had no idea that a woman was falling apart just a few feet away, separated from them by a thin pane of glass. Her laptop sat on the table, closed and silent. Sarah knew she should check her email, should see if the university had made a decision about her enrollment. But she couldn't bring herself to open it. As long as she didn't look, she could pretend there was still hope. A knock at the door made her jump. She wasn't expecting anyone. She didn't want to see anyone. But the knock came again, more insistent, and Sarah finally rose to answer it. David Chen stood in the hallway, looking exhausted and worried. In his hand was a manila envelope. "You haven't been answering your phone." "I know. Can I come in?" Sarah stepped aside to let him enter. David looked around the tiny apartment, and Sarah saw it through his eyes, the cramped space, the worn furniture, the evidence of a life lived on the margins of survival. "I brought something you need to see." David held up the envelope. "It came to my office this morning. No return address, no note, just this." Sarah took the envelope and opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper, a printout of an email. She read it, and her legs gave out beneath her. David caught her, guided her to a chair. Sarah, breathe." The email was from Columbia University's Office of Student Affairs. It was dated yesterday. "Dear Ms. Mitchell," it read, "After careful review of your academic standing and the circumstances surrounding your recent legal difficulties, the Scholarship Committee has determined that your enrollment will be terminated effective immediately. While the criminal charges against you have been dismissed, the committee feels that the publicity surrounding your case has created an untenable situation that reflects poorly on the university's reputation. Your tuition account will be credited for any unused funds. We wish you well in your future endeavors." 4 years. 4 years of sacrifice, of sleepless nights, of choosing between meals and textbooks. 4 years of believing that education was her way out, her path to a different life. Gone. All of it. Gone. "I'm so sorry," David said quietly. "I tried to call them. tried to explain, but they had already made their decision. Sarah stared at the letter, the words blurring through her tears. They don't care that I was innocent. They only care about their reputation. I know. It's not fair. Not fair. Sarah laughed, but it came out as a sob. I worked 3 jobs to put myself through school. I lived on ramen and hope for 4 years. And they're throwing me away because of newspaper headlines. David sat down across from her. There might be legal options. Wrongful termination. Discrimination based on with what money, with what energy. Sarah shook her head. I can't fight anymore. David, I don't have anything left. They sat in silence for a long moment. Outside, a car alarm went off, its shrill cry echoing through the street before someone shut it off. There's something else, David said finally. About Madison. Sarah's jaw tightened. I don't want to hear about her. You need to. The police interviewed her yesterday as part of the ongoing investigation into Victoria's allegations against Richard. Standard procedure in custody disputes. David paused. She told them everything. What do you mean, everything? She told them that she orchestrated the frame job, that she manipulated the evidence, that she used you to expose Victoria while simultaneously undermining her father. David's voice was careful, measured. She confessed to all of it. Sarah stared at him. She confessed voluntarily, without being prompted. The detective said she was completely calm, completely detailed. She explained her plan from start to finish, including how she manipulated you. Why would she do that? I don't know. Maybe guilt, maybe some kind of breakdown. The child psychologist they brought in said she's never seen anything quite like it. David rubbed his temples. The investigation is ongoing. But there's talk of having Madison placed in a psychiatric facility for evaluation. Sarah thought about Madison in a sterile hospital room, surrounded by doctors trying to understand how a 9-year-old had become capable of such calculated manipulation. She thought about the girl's eyes, so old and so cold, hiding behind the mask of a grieving child. She should have felt vindicated. Madison had confessed. The truth was finally out. But all she felt was empty. It doesn't change anything, Sarah said. My scholarship is gone. My reputation is destroyed. Even if everyone knows I was innocent, the damage is already done. Sarah, I was supposed to graduate in December. I was supposed to get a job in social work, help kids who grew up like I did. I was supposed to finally have a life that meant something. The tears came freely now. And instead, I'm right back where I started. No family, no future. Nothing. David reached out and took her hand. You're not nothing. You survived something that would have broken most people. You fought for that little girl even when everyone turned against you. And look what it got me. It got you the truth. That has to count for something. Sarah pulled her hand away and stood up, walking to the window. The Brooklyn street stretched out below her, full of people who didn't know her name, didn't know her story, didn't care about the wreckage of her dreams. Do you know what the worst part is? She said quietly. I still care about her. After everything she did, after all the manipulation and the lies, part of me still wants to help her. That's not weakness, Sarah. That's who you are. Maybe who I am is the problem. Sarah pressed her forehead against the cold glass. Maybe caring too much is why I keep getting destroyed. David didn't have an answer for that. He left an hour later, promising to keep her informed about any developments. Sarah locked the door behind him and stood alone in her apartment, surrounded by the carefully curated remnants of a life that no longer felt like hers. The letter from Colombia sat on the table, a death sentence written in bureaucratic language. Her phone sat in the drawer, full of messages from people who wanted pieces of her story. And somewhere in Manhattan, a 9-year-old girl sat in a psychiatric evaluation room, finally telling the truth about what she had done. Sarah walked to her bookshelf and pulled out a worn photo album. It was the only thing she had from her childhood, salvaged from her parents' belongings after the accident. She flipped through the pages slowly, looking at images of people she barely remembered. Her mother, young and beautiful, holding baby Sarah in the hospital. Her father, tall and serious, pushing Sarah on a swing in some park she couldn't identify. The three of them together at Christmas, surrounded by presents. A family that had seemed so permanent and had proven so fragile. They had died when she was 6, a drunk driver, a rainy night, a collision that had erased her entire world in an instant. Sarah had spent 12 years in the foster system after that, bounced from home to home, never quite fitting in anywhere. She had survived by building walls, by not getting attached, by focusing on the future instead of the present. And then she had met Madison, and all those walls had come crashing down. Sarah closed the album and held it against her chest. The tears had stopped, replaced by something harder and colder, a numbness that spread through her body like anesthesia. She could give up. She could accept that her life was over, that all her dreams had been destroyed, that the world was simply too cruel for someone like her to survive. She could curl up on this mattress and wait for the inevitable end, whatever form it took, or she could fight, not for herself, not anymore. She had nothing left to fight for on her own behalf. But Madison was still out there. Madison, who was broken in ways that no one fully understood. Madison, who had used her intelligence as a weapon because no one had ever shown her another way. Madison, who was about to be locked away in some facility where her brilliance would be treated as a disorder to be medicated away. Sarah had been that child once. Alone. Angry. Convinced that no one would ever truly see her. Someone had helped her. A teacher in 8th grade who had noticed her potential, who had encouraged her to apply for scholarships, who had believed in her when no one else did. That teacher had changed the trajectory of Sarah's life with nothing more than attention and faith. What if Sarah could be that person for Madison? It was insane. It was self-destructive. It was probably impossible. But it was also the only thing that still made sense. Sarah set down the photo album and walked to the drawer where she had hidden her phone. She pulled it out, turned it on, and waited for it to come back to life. Dozens of notifications flooded the screen. Messages, emails, missed calls. She ignored all of them and navigated to her contacts. David Chen's number was at the top of her recent calls. She pressed dial and waited. "Sarah." David answered on the second ring. "Are you okay?" "No," she said honestly. "But I need to know something. Madison's evaluation. Where is it happening?" "Presbyterian Hospital, the psychiatric wing. Why?" "I'm going to see her." "Sarah, that's not a good idea. After everything she did to you." "I know what she did. I also know why she did it." Sarah grabbed her jacket from the hook by the door. "She's a child, David. A brilliant, damaged, terrified child who has never had anyone fight for her, who didn't want something in return. And you think you can help her? Sarah paused at the door, her hand on the knob. I don't know, she admitted. But I have to try. Because if I don't, then everything I went through means nothing, and I refuse to let that be true. She hung up before he could argue and stepped out into the cold Brooklyn morning. Presbyterian Hospital was in Manhattan, an hour by subway, if the trains were running on time. Sarah started walking toward the station, her steps quickening with each block. She had lost her education, her reputation, her future, but she hadn't lost herself. Not yet. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. The subway car rattled through the tunnel, carrying Sarah toward a destination she had no right to approach. She sat in the corner seat, watching the other passengers with a detached awareness of someone who had stopped caring about social conventions. A businessman in an expensive suit scrolled through his phone. A mother wrestled with a toddler who refused to stay seated. Two teenagers shared earbuds, nodding along to music only they could hear. Ordinary people living ordinary lives. None of them knew that the woman in the worn jacket was on her way to confront the child who had destroyed her. Sarah's reflection stared back at her from the dark window. She looked terrible. 3 days of barely eating, barely sleeping, barely existing had carved hollows beneath her eyes and sharpened the angles of her face. She looked like someone who had been through a war. Maybe she had. The train emerged from the tunnel into the gray afternoon light. Manhattan rose around her, all glass and steel and indifferent ambition. Somewhere in this city of millions, a 9-year-old girl was being evaluated by psychiatrists who would try to fit her into neat diagnostic categories. Antisocial personality disorder. They would probably say attachment issues, conduct disorder. They would give Madison labels and medications and treatment plans, all designed to fix what they perceived as broken. But Sarah knew something the psychiatrists didn't. She knew what it felt like to be that child. The train stopped at 59th Street, and Sarah stepped onto the platform. Presbyterian Hospital was 6 blocks north, a towering complex of buildings that served Manhattan's wealthy and connected. The psychiatric wing was in a separate building, discreet and unmarked, because people with money preferred their mental health struggles to remain private. Sarah walked through the autumn streets, leaves crunching beneath her feet, her mind churning through everything she wanted to say. She had rehearsed speeches in her head during the subway ride, arguments and pleas and logical appeals, but now, approaching the hospital, all those carefully constructed words seemed inadequate. What could she possibly say to Madison? What could she offer a child who had learned to see love as weakness and trust as vulnerability? A small park appeared on her left, a pocket of green between towering buildings. Sarah stopped, drawn by something she couldn't quite identify. An instinct, maybe, or just the need to delay the confrontation a few minutes longer. She sat on a bench and watched the people passing by. Dog walkers, mostly. Their charges sniffing at trees and fire hydrants with single-minded focus. One dog in particular caught her attention, a scruffy mutt with mismatched ears and a perpetually wagging tail. The dog reminded her of something. A memory, buried so deep she had almost forgotten it existed. She had been 7 years old, newly arrived at her second foster home. The family had a dog, a gentle old retriever named Biscuit who slept on a bed by the fireplace. Sarah had been terrified of everything in those early days, still reeling from her parents' death, still expecting every new situation to end in disaster. But Biscuit hadn't cared about her fear. The dog had simply walked over to where Sarah sat, huddled in a corner, laid his head in her lap, and stayed there. No judgment, no expectations, no demands. Just presence. Sarah had cried into Biscuit's fur for hours that first night. The dog had never moved. She had only stayed at that foster home for 3 months before being moved again. But she had never forgotten Biscuit, had never forgotten what it felt like to have another living creature offer unconditional acceptance. That was what Madison had never experienced. Not from her absent father, not from her dying mother, not from the parade of nannies and caregivers who had seen her as a problem to be managed. Everyone in Madison's life had wanted something from her, had imposed conditions on their affection. No wonder she had learned to manipulate. It was the only form of control she had ever been allowed. Sarah stood up from the bench, a new clarity settling over her. She wasn't going to the hospital to confront Madison or to demand explanations or to seek some kind of closure for herself. She was going because someone had to show that child what unconditional presence looked like. The psychiatric wing of Presbyterian Hospital was exactly as Sarah had expected. Quiet, clean, decorated in soothing colors designed to calm agitated minds. The reception desk was staffed by a woman with a professional smile and watchful eyes. "I'm here to see Madison Harper." The receptionist's smile flickered. "Are you family?" "No." "Then I'm afraid visiting is restricted. Ms. Harper is undergoing evaluation, and only approved family members are permitted access." Sarah had anticipated this. "I'm not asking to visit as a guest. I'm asking to speak with whoever is in charge of her case." That would be Dr. Elizabeth Warren. "She's with a patient right now, but I can leave a message." "Tell her Sarah Mitchell is here. Tell her I'm the woman Madison framed for theft." Sarah leaned forward slightly. "And tell her I have information about Madison's mental state that might be relevant to her evaluation." The receptionist's professional composure cracked slightly. She picked up the phone and made a quiet call, her eyes never leaving Sarah. 5 minutes later, a door opened and a woman in her 50s emerged. Dr. Warren had gray-streaked hair pulled back in a practical bun, kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, and the slightly weary expression of someone who had spent decades trying to understand the human mind. "Ms. Mitchell, I have to admit, I didn't expect you to come here." "Neither did I." Dr. Warren studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "Come with me. We should talk." They walked through a series of locked doors, each one requiring a key card, until they reached a small office filled with books and files and a single window overlooking the park where Sarah had sat moments before. "Please, sit down, Dr." Warren gestured to a chair across from her desk. "I've read about your case. I know what Madison did to you. Then you know I have every reason to hate her. And yet, here you are." Sarah took a breath. "I grew up in the foster system, 12 years, 7 different homes. I know what it's like to be a child that no one wants, to feel like you have to fight for every scrap of attention and affection." She met the doctor's eyes. "Madison isn't evil. She's not a sociopath or a psychopath or whatever label you're trying to pin on her. She's a traumatized child who figured out that manipulation was the only way to survive." Dr. Warren leaned back in her chair. "That's a remarkably compassionate assessment, given what she put you through." Compassion isn't about whether someone deserves it. It's about whether they need it. The doctor was quiet for a moment. When she spoke again, her voice was thoughtful. Madison has been here for 2 days. In that time, she's spoken to 3 different psychiatrists, 2 child psychologists, and a family therapist. Do you know what she's told them? No. Everything. Every detail of her plan, every manipulation, every lie. She's been completely transparent about what she did and why. Dr. Warren picked up a file from her desk. But there's one thing she won't talk about. One subject she refuses to engage with. What, you? Sarah felt something shift in her chest. What do you mean? Every time your name comes up? Madison shuts down, changes the subject, gives one-word answers, refuses to elaborate. It's the only topic that breaks through her analytical detachment. Dr. Warren set down the file. I've been doing this work for 30 years. Ms. Mitchell. I've seen children who manipulate, children who lie, children who hurt others without remorse. Madison is different. How? Because she feels guilt. Real guilt, not performed guilt. Whatever she did to you, whatever plan she executed, it cost her something. And she doesn't know how to process that cost. Sarah thought about the text message Madison had sent her. Thank you for playing your part. The cold, clinical words of a strategist congratulating a useful asset. But she also thought about the night Madison had shared half a cookie with her, the way the girl's hand had trembled slightly when she handed it over, as if the small gesture of generosity was terrifying in its vulnerability. I want to see her, Sarah said. I'm not sure that's wise. For either of you. Maybe not. But I think it's necessary. Sarah leaned forward. You can watch through whatever cameras or windows you have. You can have security standing by. But give me 10 minutes with her. Just 10 minutes. Dr. Warren studied her face for a long moment. Why, after everything she did, why do you want to help her? Sarah thought about the question, searching for an answer that would make sense to someone who hadn't lived her life. Because when I was at my lowest, someone helped me. Not because I deserved it, not because I earned it, but because they saw that I needed it. Sarah's voice was steady. Madison needs someone to show her that people can care without wanting something in return. That trust isn't always a weapon. That being vulnerable doesn't always mean being hurt. And you think you can show her that in 10 minutes. I think I can start. Dr. Warren was silent for a long moment. Then she stood up and walked to the door. Follow me. They walked through another series of hallways until they reached a room with a large observation window. Through the glass, Sarah could see a comfortable space, more like a bedroom than a hospital room. Soft lighting, a bed with a colorful comforter, books on shelves, art supplies on a table. Madison sat in a chair by the window, staring out at the park below. She looked smaller than Sarah remembered, younger somehow. The sharp edges of her manipulation had softened, replaced by something that looked almost like exhaustion. She asked for art supplies this morning. Dr. Warren said quietly, She's been drawing for hours. Sarah looked at the papers scattered around Madison's chair. From this distance, she couldn't see the images clearly, but she could see the intensity of the colors, reds and blacks and deep blues. What is she drawing? We're not sure yet. She won't show anyone. Sarah nodded slowly. I'm ready. Dr. Warren unlocked the door. I'll be watching from here. If things escalate, I'll intervene. They won't. Sarah stepped into the room, and the door closed behind her with a soft click. Madison didn't turn around. She must have heard someone enter, must have known she was no longer alone. But she continued staring out the window, as if the world outside was more real than the one she inhabited. Sarah walked slowly across the room, her footsteps quiet on the carpet. She didn't speak, didn't announce her presence, just moved to stand near Madison, close enough to be acknowledged, far enough to respect the girl's space. For a long moment, neither of them said anything. Then Madison spoke, her voice flat and distant. They sent you to talk to me. No one sent me. I came on my own. Madison finally turned her head. Her eyes, those calculating eyes that had hidden so much for so long, were red-rimmed and swollen. She had been crying. Why? It was the same question everyone kept asking. Why help someone who hurt you? Why care about someone who used you? Why extend grace to someone who showed you none? Sarah pulled a chair over and sat down, facing Madison. She looked at the drawings scattered around them and recognized the images now. They were all portraits of Catherine Harper, Madison's mother, captured in dozens of different moments, laughing, reading, sleeping, holding a younger Madison in her arms, and one image, set apart from the others, that showed Catherine in a hospital bed, pale and thin, with a small figure standing beside her. Madison followed Sarah's gaze to the drawing. She asked me to promise, the girl said quietly, right before she died. She asked me to promise that I would be okay. Sarah waited. I couldn't do it. I couldn't promise her that, because I knew it wasn't true. Madison's voice cracked. So I promised her something else instead. I promised that I would survive, no matter what. And you did. I did. Madison looked at Sarah. And for the first time, there was no calculation in her expression. Just exhaustion and grief and something that might have been hope. But I don't know how to do anything else. Sarah reached out slowly, giving Madison time to pull away if she wanted to. The girl didn't move. Sarah's hand came to rest on Madison's, small and cold and trembling slightly. Then maybe, Sarah said softly, it's time to learn. The next 72 hours changed everything. Sarah spent every permitted moment at Presbyterian Hospital, sitting with Madison in the art-filled room, rebuilding something that had been shattered. They didn't talk about the manipulation at first, didn't address the betrayal directly. Instead, they drew together. They read books aloud. They sat in comfortable silence, learning to exist in the same space without weapons raised. Dr. Warren observed it all, her clinical skepticism slowly giving way to cautious optimism. Madison was responding to Sarah in ways she hadn't responded to any of the psychiatrists. The walls were coming down, brick by brick, revealing the wounded child beneath the strategic armor. On the third day, Madison finally spoke about what she had done. I convinced myself you were just another piece on the board, she said, staring at a half-finished drawing of her mother. Everyone else was my dad, Aunt Victoria, the nannies, the lawyers. They all wanted something from me. Money, control, validation. I thought you were the same. What changed your mind? Madison was quiet for a long moment. The night you got arrested, when they were dragging you out. You didn't curse at me or threaten me. You just looked at me with these eyes that were so... She struggled for the word. Hurt, not angry. Hurt, like I had actually wounded you. You did. I know. Madison set down her pencil. That's when I realized you were different. But by then, my plan was already in motion. I couldn't stop it without destroying myself. So you sent me the text message. Told me my charges would be dropped. I wanted to fix what I could, without having to admit what I had done. Madison's voice dropped to a whisper. I was a coward. Sarah reached over and took the girl's hand. You were 9 years old, trying to survive in a world that had taken everything from you. That's not cowardice. That's desperation. The conversation was interrupted by Dr. Warren entering the room, her expression troubled. We have a situation. Sarah stood up immediately. What's wrong? Victoria Harper was released on bail this morning. Apparently, she has some very expensive lawyers who argued that the case against her is falling apart. Madison's face went pale. That's impossible. I gave them the evidence. I confessed to everything. Your confession actually helped her case. Dr. Warren's voice was grim. Her lawyers are arguing that you are an unreliable witness, that your manipulation of the evidence proves nothing can be trusted, including the video of Victoria planting the necklace. Sarah felt her stomach drop. What about Richard? He's been fighting to get Madison released into his custody, but the court is hesitant given the ongoing investigation. Meanwhile, Victoria has filed an emergency motion claiming that Richard is unfit and that Madison should be placed with her as temporary guardian. She can't do that. Madison's voice rose with panic. She can't take me. I won't go with her. The hearing is tomorrow morning. Family court, 9 a.m. Sarah's mind raced through the implications. Victoria had adapted, had used Madison's own confession against her. The woman was as strategic as her niece, and she had decades more experience at this game. There has to be something we can do. Sarah said, there might be. Dr. Warren pulled out her phone. I received a call from David Chen an hour ago. He's been investigating Victoria's finances, following the trail of money she's been moving around for the past 2 years. He thinks he's found something, but he needs someone to verify it. Verify it how? The records are at Victoria's apartment. Financial documents that would prove she's been embezzling from Madison's trust fund for years, not just planning to take it in the future. Dr. Warren looked at Sarah. He asked if you would be willing to help. Me? How? Victoria doesn't know you're involved with Madison again. She thinks you've disappeared, licked your wounds, and moved on. That gives you access that no one else has. Sarah understood what was being asked. Break into Victoria Harper's apartment. Find evidence of financial crimes. Get out without being caught. It was illegal. It was dangerous. It was probably insane. She looked at Madison, at the terror in the girl's eyes, at the fragile trust they had begun to rebuild. Tell me what I need to do. The plan came together quickly. Victoria's apartment was in a luxury building on the Upper East Side, the kind of place with doormen and security cameras and residents who paid premium prices for privacy. But David had done his research. He knew that Victoria was scheduled to meet with her lawyers at 7 p.m., preparing for tomorrow's hearing. He knew that her housekeeper left at 6. He knew that the building's service entrance had a 30-second window between security sweeps. Sarah would have exactly 45 minutes to get in, find the documents, and get out. This is crazy. she muttered as she stood in an alley across from Victoria's building, dressed in black, a small backpack over her shoulders. David's voice crackled through the earpiece he had given her. The security guard just started his rounds. You have 30 seconds to reach the service door. Sarah took a deep breath and moved. The service entrance was propped open slightly, just as David had arranged. She slipped through and found herself in a utilitarian hallway, all concrete and fluorescent lights. The elevator to the residential floors required a key card, but David had obtained one through the means Sarah chose not to question. She rode up to the 32nd floor, her heart pounding against her ribs. The hallway was empty. Victoria's apartment was at the end, a corner unit with views of Central Park. Sarah approached the door and pulled out the lockpicks David had given her, tools she had never used before but had practiced with for 2 hours that afternoon. The lock was expensive, but not as sophisticated as it could have been. Victoria clearly relied on the building's security more than her own. After 3 agonizing minutes, the mechanism clicked open. Sarah stepped inside and closed the door behind her. The apartment was stunning. High ceilings, designer furniture, art on the walls that probably cost more than Sarah would earn in a lifetime. But she didn't have time to admire the decor. The office is down the hall on the left, David said in her ear. She keeps her personal files in a safe behind the bookshelf. Sarah moved through the apartment, her footsteps silent on the hardwood floors. The office was exactly where David had described. A masculine space filled with leather furniture and dark wood. The bookshelf dominated one wall, filled with legal texts and family photos. The safe was hidden behind a false panel, just as David had predicted. The combination was Madison's birthday, a number Victoria had used for years, too arrogant to think anyone would guess. Sarah opened the safe and found exactly what they needed. Bank statements showing transfers from Madison's trust fund to offshore accounts. Forged signatures on withdrawal authorizations. Documentation of shell companies created to hide the stolen money. Victoria had been siphoning funds for years, preparing for the day when she could take full control. Sarah photographed everything with her phone, making sure each document was clearly legible. The evidence was damning, irrefutable, enough to not only block Victoria's custody bid, but to send her to prison. "I've got it," Sarah whispered. "I'm coming out." "Wait." David's voice was sharp. "There's movement in the lobby. Someone's coming up." Sarah froze. "Victoria." "I don't know. The elevator is moving. You need to hide." Sarah shoved the documents back into the safe and closed it, then looked around the office for somewhere to conceal herself. The closet was too obvious. Under the desk was too exposed. The window. The office had a small balcony, accessible through a sliding glass door. Sarah slipped outside and pressed herself against the wall, hidden from view by the curtains. She heard the apartment door open. Footsteps in the hallway, a voice she recognized. Victoria Harper was home. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. She was trapped 32 floors above the street, with nowhere to go and no way to escape without being seen. "Someone's been here." Victoria's voice was cold, controlled. "The safe has been touched." Sarah heard more footsteps, then the click of a phone being dialed. "This is Victoria Harper. I need security at my apartment immediately. I believe I have an intruder." Panic surged through Sarah's body. In minutes, the building would be locked down. Security would search every floor, every corner, every possible hiding place. She would be found, arrested, and this time there would be no mysterious bail money to save her. She looked at the balcony railing. Then at the next balcony over, perhaps 8 feet away. A different apartment, a possible escape route. It was an impossible jump. The gap between balconies was too wide, the drop too far. One misstep and she would fall 32 stories to the pavement below. But staying meant certain capture, certain imprisonment, certain failure. Madison's face flashed through her mind. The girl was counting on her. After everything they had been through, after all the damage and the healing and the fragile hope they had built together, Sarah couldn't fail her now. She climbed onto the railing, her hands gripping the cold metal, her body trembling with fear. "David," she whispered, "if this doesn't work, tell Madison I tried." "Sarah, what are you doing, Sarah?" She jumped. For a moment, she was suspended in the air. Nothing beneath her but empty space and the distant city lights. The wind rushed past her face. Her arms reached forward, stretching toward the next balcony, toward salvation or death. Her hands caught the railing. The impact nearly tore her arms from their sockets. Her body slammed against the balcony's edge, driving the breath from her lungs. Her feet dangled over the abyss, 32 stories of nothing below her. She held on. Her muscles screamed in protest as she pulled herself up, inch by agonizing inch. Her fingers slipped on the metal, slick with sweat. Her shoulders felt like they were being ripped apart. But she held on. With a final desperate heave, she hauled herself over the railing and collapsed onto the balcony floor. Gasping for air, her entire body shaking with adrenaline and terror. She had made it. Behind her, she could hear Victoria's voice, sharp with anger, directing security to search the building. But Sarah was no longer in Victoria's apartment. She was in a stranger's home, and in a few moments, she would be gone entirely. She forced herself to her feet, forced herself to move through the dark apartment, forced herself to find the front door and slip into the hallway. The elevator was too risky. She took the stairs, descending 32 flights on legs that felt like rubber. Her heart pounding so hard she thought it might burst. When she finally emerged onto the street, the night air hit her face like a blessing. She walked away from the building, forcing herself not to run, forcing herself to look like just another pedestrian in the city that never slept. Her phone buzzed, a text from David. "Did you get out? Are you okay?" Sarah typed back with trembling fingers. "I got everything. Meet me at the courthouse tomorrow morning." She looked up at the sky, at the stars barely visible through the city lights, and allowed herself a moment of hope. Tomorrow, Victoria Harper would face justice. Tomorrow, Madison would finally be safe. And tomorrow, Sarah would find out if everything she had risked had been worth it. The family courtroom was smaller than Sarah expected, intimate in a way that felt almost suffocating. Wooden benches lined the gallery, filled with lawyers and social workers and a handful of reporters who had caught wind that something significant was happening in the Harper case. The judge's bench dominated the front of the room, elevated and imposing, flanked by flags that hung limp in the still air. Sarah sat in the back row, her body aching from the previous night's escape, her mind sharp with purpose. The photographs were saved on her phone, backed up to David's computer, ready to be presented the moment the opportunity arose. Victoria Harper entered the courtroom with the confidence of someone who believed she had already won. She wore a cream-colored suit, understated and elegant, her hair perfectly styled, her makeup flawless. She smiled at her lawyers, nodded graciously to the social workers, played the role of concerned aunt with practiced ease. Richard Harper sat on the opposite side of the room, looking haggard and defeated. His lawyers shuffled papers nervously, clearly unprepared for the assault Victoria's team had mounted. The past week had aged him visibly, carving new lines into his face and dulling the sharp intelligence in his eyes. Madison was not present. Minors were rarely brought to custody hearings. Dr. Warren had explained. The child would wait at the hospital, her fate decided by adults arguing over her like a prize to be won. The judge entered, a stern-faced man in his 60s named Harold Patterson. He had a reputation for fairness. David had told Sarah, but also for following procedure rigidly. Whatever evidence they presented would need to be obtained legally, or Patterson would throw it out without hesitation. That was the risk. Sarah had broken into Victoria's apartment. She had stolen confidential documents. Nothing she had found could be presented directly without incriminating herself. But David had a plan. "This hearing will come to order," Judge Patterson announced. "We are here to consider the emergency motion filed by Victoria Harper for temporary guardianship of Madison Harper, age 9. Ms. Harper, your counsel may proceed." Victoria's lead attorney, a silver-haired man named Preston Wells, rose with the smooth confidence of someone billing $800 an hour. "Your Honor, my client seeks temporary guardianship based on clear evidence that Richard Harper is unfit to care for his daughter. In the past month alone, Mr. Harper employed a caregiver who was subsequently arrested for grand larceny. His daughter was driven to such psychological extremes that she orchestrated an elaborate scheme to escape her home environment. The child is currently confined to a psychiatric facility, a direct result of the chaos and neglect that characterizes Mr. Harper's household." Richard's attorney objected, but the damage was done. The narrative had been established. Richard was the problem. Victoria was the solution. The hearing continued for an hour, each side presenting arguments and counter-arguments, painting competing pictures of a family torn apart by tragedy and dysfunction. Sarah watched Victoria's performance with grudging admiration. The woman was masterful, crying at appropriate moments, expressing concern for Madison with apparent sincerity, positioning herself as the stable presence the child desperately needed. It was all lies, but they were beautiful lies, crafted with the precision of an artist. Finally, David rose from his seat. He had been granted permission to address the court as a friend of the family, a designation that gave him limited speaking rights but no official standing. "Your Honor, I apologize for the interruption, but new evidence has come to light that is directly relevant to this hearing." Preston Wells objected immediately. "Your Honor, Mr. Chen has no standing in this proceeding. Whatever evidence he claims to have should be submitted through proper channels. The evidence was obtained this morning," David said, "and involves allegations of financial misconduct by Victoria Harper. Given the urgency of the custody decision, I respectfully request permission to present it now." Judge Patterson frowned. "What kind of financial misconduct?" "Embezzlement, Your Honor. From Madison Harper's trust fund." The courtroom erupted. Victoria's face went pale. Preston Wells demanded a recess. Richard sat forward in his seat, suddenly alert. Patterson banged his gavel. "Order. I will have order in this courtroom." He turned to David. "Mr. Chen, these are serious allegations. What evidence do you have?" "Your Honor, approximately 1 hour ago, an anonymous source delivered a package to my office. The package contained bank statements, wire transfer records, and corporate filings that document a systematic pattern of theft from the trust fund established by Catherine Harper for her daughter." Sarah watched Victoria carefully. The woman's composure had cracked, just slightly. Her eyes darted to her lawyers, seeking reassurance that wasn't coming. The documents show that over the past 3 years, Victoria Harper has transferred approximately $4.7 million from Madison's trust fund to offshore accounts controlled by shell companies she created. David held up a folder. "I have copies for the court and all parties." Preston Wells was on his feet again. "Your Honor, this is outrageous. These so-called documents could be fabricated. We have no way to verify their authenticity or their source." "That's why I've also brought a witness," David said. "Someone who can speak directly to Victoria Harper's intentions and methods." Patterson raised an eyebrow. "And who is this witness?" The courtroom doors opened, and Dr. Warren walked in, accompanied by a small figure in a simple blue dress. Madison Harper. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. Madison looked fragile but determined, her chin raised, her eyes fixed on the judge's bench. She walked past Victoria without glancing at her aunt, past her father without acknowledging his presence, and took her place at the witness stand. "Your Honor," Dr. Warren said, "I am Dr. Elizabeth Warren, the psychiatrist overseeing Madison Harper's evaluation. After extensive consultation with my patient, she has expressed a strong desire to address this court directly. Given the circumstances, I believe her testimony is essential to understanding the full picture of this family situation." Patterson studied Madison for a long moment. "Young lady, do you understand where you are and what's happening?" "Yes, Your Honor." Madison's voice was steady. "This is a hearing to decide who will take care of me. My aunt wants custody. My father wants custody. And I want to tell you the truth about both of them. You understand that you're very young to be testifying in a proceeding like this." "I'm 9 years old, Your Honor. But I've been managing my own survival since my mother died. I think that qualifies me to speak about my own life." A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Patterson nodded slowly. "Very well. You may proceed." Madison took a deep breath. 3 years ago, my mother was diagnosed with cancer. She knew she was going to die, so she started preparing. She set up a trust fund for me, made sure I would be taken care of financially. She also wrote letters that explained things she wanted me to know when I was older. "What kind of things?" "She warned me about Aunt Victoria." Madison's eyes finally moved to her aunt, cold and unflinching. "She told me that Victoria had always been jealous of her, had always wanted what she had. She told me to be careful, to watch for signs that Victoria was trying to take control." Victoria stood up. "This is absurd, Your Honor. You cannot allow a disturbed child to—" "Sit down, Ms. Harper." Patterson's voice was sharp. "You will have your chance to respond. Continue, Madison." "After my mom died, I started watching. I saw Aunt Victoria meeting with lawyers, asking questions about my trust fund. I heard her on the phone, talking about guardianship and money and how my father was too weak to stop her." Madison's voice wavered slightly. then steadied. So, I started recording everything. Video, audio, documents. I was building a case, the way my mom told me to. And the incident with Ms. Mitchell, the woman who was accused of stealing the necklace. Madison's composure finally cracked. She looked down at her hands, clasped tightly in her lap. I let Aunt Victoria frame her. I knew it was happening. And I let it happen because I thought it would expose Victoria's true nature. A tear slid down her cheek. But I was wrong. Sarah didn't deserve what happened to her. She was the only person who ever saw me as more than a problem to be solved. The courtroom was silent. Even Victoria's lawyers seemed stunned by the raw emotion in Madison's testimony. The documents Mr. Chen has are real, Madison continued. I found them in Aunt Victoria's apartment 6 months ago. During a visit, I made copies and hid them. I was waiting for the right moment to use them. You broke into your aunt's private files. I was 9 years old, visiting my aunt's apartment. I wasn't breaking in. I was exploring. A ghost of a smile crossed Madison's face. And I found exactly what my mother warned me I would find. Patterson turned to Victoria. Ms. Harper, do you have anything to say in response to these allegations? Victoria stood slowly, her composure restored, her voice calm. Your Honor, my niece is clearly disturbed. She has admitted to manipulating evidence, to deceiving adults, to orchestrating elaborate schemes. Nothing she says can be trusted. Then you deny embezzling from her trust fund. Absolutely. Any financial transactions I made were authorized and legitimate. Your Honor. David stepped forward again. I anticipated that Miss Harper would deny these allegations. That's why I took the liberty of contacting the FBI's Financial Crimes Division this morning. They have agreed to open an investigation based on the documents provided. Victoria's face went white. You can't do that. Those documents were obtained illegally. Actually, they weren't. David smiled slightly. Madison Harper is a named beneficiary of the trust fund in question. As such, she has legal standing to request financial records related to her own assets. The documents were obtained by a minor exercising her fiduciary rights. It was a stretch, and everyone in the courtroom knew it. But it was enough. The seed had been planted. The FBI was involved. Whatever happened in this custody hearing, Victoria's crimes would be investigated. Patterson banged his gavel again. This hearing is recessed until tomorrow morning, at which time I will render my decision. In the meantime, Victoria Harper is ordered not to leave the state of New York. Madison Harper will remain in the custody of Presbyterian Hospital pending further evaluation. The courtroom dissolved into chaos. Lawyers argued, reporters shouted questions. Victoria was surrounded by her legal team in urgent conference. But Sarah only had eyes for Madison. The girl climbed down from the witness stand and walked through the crowd, ignoring everyone around her. She stopped in front of Sarah, her eyes red-rimmed but clear. I told the truth, Madison said. All of it. I know. Are you angry at me for everything I did? Sarah thought about the question. The manipulation, the betrayal, the weeks of pain and fear and loss. Madison had put her through hell, had used her as a pawn in a game she didn't understand. But she had also been a 9-year-old girl fighting alone against forces that would have crushed most adults. She had been trying to survive in a world that had taken everything from her. No, Sarah said finally. I'm not angry. Madison's lower lip trembled. I don't understand. You should hate me. Sarah knelt down so they were eye to eye. When I was your age, I did whatever I had to do to survive. I lied. I manipulated. I pushed everyone away before they could hurt me. Sound familiar? Madison nodded slowly. Someone gave me a second chance. Someone saw past all the armor I had built and decided I was worth believing in. Sarah reached out and took Madison's hand. I'm not going to hate you for being exactly who I used to be. Madison's composure finally broke. She threw herself into Sarah's arms, sobbing against her shoulder, all the weight of the past year pouring out in a flood of tears. Sarah held her tight, stroking her hair, murmuring words of comfort. Around them, the courtroom continued its chaos. But in this small space, this moment of connection, none of it mattered. Richard Harper approached slowly, his expression uncertain. Sarah, I don't know what to say. You don't have to say anything. Sarah looked up at him, still holding Madison. Just be there for your daughter. That's all she's ever wanted. Richard knelt down beside them, his arms wrapping around Madison from the other side. The three of them stayed like that for a long moment, a fragile unit formed from the wreckage of broken lives. The next morning, Judge Patterson ruled against Victoria's custody petition. The FBI investigation was officially opened. Within a week, Victoria Harper was arrested and charged with embezzlement, fraud, and theft from a miners' trust fund. She would eventually plead guilty to avoid a trial, receiving a sentence of 8 to 12 years in federal prison. Richard Harper was granted full custody of Madison, with the stipulation that she continue her psychiatric treatment and maintain regular contact with Dr. Warren and Sarah Mitchell, the waitress who had stumbled into a world she didn't understand, was offered a position she never expected. I want you to stay, Richard said, standing in his penthouse office, looking out at the city that had witnessed so much pain. Not as a nanny or a caregiver, as a guardian, a co-parent, whatever you want to call it. I don't have any qualifications for that. You have the only qualification that matters. Richard turned to face her. Madison trusts you. After everything she's been through, you're the only person she truly trusts. Sarah thought about her lost scholarship, her abandoned dreams of social work, the life she had planned that had been shattered beyond recognition. And then she thought about Madison, about the journey they had taken together, about the fragile hope that was slowly growing between them. I'll stay, she said, but not for money, not as an employee. Then, as what? Sarah smiled. As family. 6 months later, Sarah stood in the doorway of Catherine Harper's art studio, watching Madison paint. The room had been sealed since Catherine's death, a shrine to grief that no one dared enter. Now sunlight streamed through clean windows, illuminating canvases both old and new. Madison's paintings hung alongside her mother's, a conversation across time between two souls who had never stopped loving each other. Richard appeared beside Sarah, 2 cups of coffee in his hands. He offered one to her without speaking, and they watched together as Madison added final touches to her latest work. The painting showed 3 figures standing on a bridge, looking toward a sunrise. Behind them, storm clouds retreated into the distance. Ahead, the sky blazed with possibility. Madison had titled it Family, not the family you were born into. Sarah had learned But the family you choose, the family you build from broken pieces and second chances, and the stubborn refusal to give up on each other. That was the truth Catherine Harper had tried to teach her daughter. Love is not about perfection. It is about presence. It is about staying when everything tells you to run. Sarah had lost her scholarship, her reputation, her carefully constructed plans for the future. But she had gained something far more valuable. She had gained a daughter who needed her, a purpose that fulfilled her, and a home where she finally belonged. Sometimes the greatest gifts come wrapped in the worst disasters. Sometimes you have to lose everything to find what truly matters. And sometimes, a 9-year-old girl and a struggling waitress can teach each other what it means to be brave. Have you ever been wrongly accused of something you did not do? The way Sarah was that night in the Harper penthouse. How did you find the strength to keep fighting when everyone believed the worst about you? Share your story in the comments below. You never know who might need to hear it.